So with that, I would be delighted to turn off my camera and welcome Nadia, Neil, and Susan. Over to you guys.
Thank you, Anthony, and hello and good day to everyone joining us from across the country. We want to welcome you to the latest CAA CARP webinar. As Anthony said, my name is Nadia Matos, and I'm your moderator for the next hour. Today, we're talking about traveling trends and doing it safely. To help us decipher it all is our CAA travel experts, Susan Postma, Regional Manager for CAA, and Neil Henderson, the Director of Product and Pricing for Orion Travel Insurance. As Anthony mentioned, a quick reminder, we will be taking questions from our audience, so please do put them in the chat. Let's jump right in. Susan, travel is heating back up, and you're seeing a big range in the places people are choosing for their next trip. Can you tell us about some of the hottest travel destinations right now?
I think you're bang on. Travel was so busy last year. We didn't think it could get any busier, and we're really seeing that trend continue this year. There are many destinations, and we're going to talk about a number of them, and I've seen some of them already in the comments, but really what's probably super popular right now is Europe. Europe. From Italy to Portugal, Spain, the UK, France, cities like Prague and Budapest and Amsterdam, really seeing such activity in Europe. Europe has so much to offer, from dining to entertainment to architecture to the arts and theater. Really, whatever it is that you would like to see, Europe really can offer that. Their transportation, Eurail, really very progressive and enhanced and easy to use. You can also just read a good book at a cafe if you don't want to do all the activities. There's just a lot that can be available to you and so much to experience. Taking a bike in Amsterdam, you can do a lot by foot. So you're seeing a ton there. We're also seeing kind of tried and true still being super popular, like Greece and Turkey. You can do island hopping. The vistas are beautiful. The sunshine is glorious. It is warm. It is hot. If you don't want to go as far as the Mediterranean, winter destinations, we have seen bookings for that winter destination have already started for months now. So Mexico, Florida, Arizona, all super popular.
Now, which bucket list destinations are really piquing people's interest these days, Susan?
Well, number one on my list, and I've seen it a lot, was Japan. We're really seeing a real interest in Japan. You know, there's skyscrapers, the temples, again, architecture, the food, the culture. It's really showing such interest, and we're really seeing activity there. Africa is truly a bucket list experience, you know, from Cape Town to Johannesburg, which are really such fascinating cities that offer everything from wine and wine tours, and of course, visiting such landmarks like Victoria Falls and taking a safari. Definitely a real bucket list destination. Australia and New Zealand, again, such an enormity. You really need to invest some time there. We're hearing of people who do motor coach tours, or they rent an RV and tour with their family throughout New Zealand. So again, such a vibrant city, world-class dining, world-class food, and of course the scenery. The scenery is breathtaking. So I have to say, you know, other trends that we're really seeing bucket list is that kind of National Geographic tour, like to the Galapagos, or a Cork expedition to Antarctica, really immersing in such the geography, the temperature, just the environment. The ecotourism is really on a lot of people's radar, and such an interesting thing. They can go in Australia, when we look at that one, you know, you can visit koala conservation centers. We're seeing people doing activities like scuba diving. They're really immersing themselves in and giving over to what is really, for many, a trip of a lifetime.
Well, those sound like amazing trips, and I know that they're on my bucket list, but we want to make sure that we plan well. And Neil, with all these exotic options at hand, what considerations should travelers have when planning their big trip?
Yeah, well, I think when it comes to planning ahead, whether it's to a destination that's more established, like a country in Europe or Japan, or if it is something that's more exotic, an important resource to keep in mind that you should check out is the Canadian government's travel and tourism website. It's travel.gc.ca. an easy web search will find that. And there you're going to find a lot of information on destinations around the world. You'll find information about the destination, but also if there's any travel advisories that can help you make an informed decision and offer advice on how to travel to those destinations safely. It's important to keep an eye on this before you book your trip, so you're making that decision to book informed, but also continue to check it before you depart. There can be certain benefits that trigger if there's a travel advisory that your travel insurance can help out with. So the other thing I would say when it comes to planning ahead, it's obviously very important that you have your medical insurance in place before you depart on your trip. But really, we advise that everybody buy their travel insurance well in advance. It's best to keep in mind the travel insurance when you're booking your trip. That gives you the peace of mind that the insurance is not something you might forget. But what's also really important is beyond the medical insurance is the cancellation insurance. Again, there are certain benefits that can trigger if there is a travel advisory for your destination, and you're going to want to have that insurance in place before that travel advisory triggers, so that your policy can respond and make sure that if you do have to make a decision to cancel or alter your plans in any way, that the travel insurance is in place to support you through that.
So that's why there's the recommendation of like booking your travel. As soon as you book your travel, you book your
Yes.
travel insurance as well, because if there is a cancellation or something that happened, that won't be covered if you wait a couple days before the trip is announced and there's something big that happens around the same time, right?
100%. That's correct. If you know you don't want to have an event happen and then you go and buy your insurance to cover it, that insurance has to be in place before something happens in order for you to benefit from the protection.
Okay, Susan, can you tell us about some of the types of travel that are really driving interest today?
There are several, and the first that I'd like to talk about are motor coach tours. We're really seeing again with the popularity in Europe, but coach tours is a terrific way to really comfortably and kind of no fuss, no muss see so much. The real perks of coach tours can be you can really choose a bit of a price and itinerary that really suits to you. It can be 7 or 8 days, it can be 28 or 31 days. You can really customize where you want to go and how long you want to go. We have some great tour operators that really do tailor to what the needs are, from Trafalgar, which I think is very well known, to Globus, to Member Choice Vacations. But then there's great solo group tour operators like Just You. And then if you'd like a smaller experience, you could do a smaller coach tour, such as a Royal Irish tour. So there's just so much available now. There's so many more options every year. I think there's more and more. When we even look at coach tours more locally, CAA Saskatchewan West World Tours is out of that club, and they really do a great program that customizes to if you'd like to go to Branson, Missouri to see the Osmond brothers or do a lovely stay in Victoria. It does allow you to sort of stay closer to home or go further out, but tours just give you that opportunity to just kind of sit back and have it escorted with a host that is really experienced in destination. As I said, many of these tours are escorted. They're there to escort and support the whole group, so they would be able to kind of be that point of contact for that whole group. Tours also, they're more and more and more customizing and really detailing activity levels. You know, some would like to have a little bit more of a calmer one. Sometimes some of the activities are a little too extensive, and you really want to know kind of what you're signing up for and what you're booking for, so it best suits so that you have the best experience. So for coach tours, I think we're really seeing such a massive trend there, and really such an interest. Other things that are soaring of well, of course, we've talked coach tours, but cruising is also very popular.
Before we get to cruises, Susan, we have a question from the audience.
Okay.
What advice would you give to seniors with perhaps a mild physical ailment, like using or needing a cane for any type of lengthy walk?
I think for that type of thing, I think you really do need to look at what the itinerary is like. Pick an itinerary and sort of disclose that. And when you talk with your travel agent, they can make recommendations to help customize that. Some European destinations, very cobblestoned road, very maybe kind of hilly and cliffy, maybe would not be the destination that you would look for. So if you really have a cane, but still have some good mobility, I think you really want to disclose that. Things like arranging a wheelchair at the airport, some of those extra touches to help you navigate best is available to you. And there's tours that would be able to fit what those, needs might be as far as how much exertion and how much activity you'd like to have.
Okay, back to cruises.
Back to cruising.
You spoke about cruising. What kind of cruises are really leading the way?
Cruise. So there's ocean and river cruising, and really they are, ocean, of course, is that much more popular, but river has really got its sweet spot as well. When we talk about ocean cruising, you know, there's a range of activity and there's a range of course, entertainment. There's a range of food and beverage. You can go as many as 6,000 people on a ocean cruise. You can go 1,600 on an ocean cruise. It allows you to sort of choose what's best for you. There's a range of options as far as pricing, as far as you can have an inside cabin and still make use of all of the amenities and wonderful things, or you can go all the way up to a suite and have a full go. Some people look at the destination, the cruise itself is the destination. So, you know, they're really, you know, maybe they do want an easier kind of soft or quiet. The cruise itself is the destination and they can still make use of that. And maybe they don't do those excursions. So it does just allow, so cruises really offers a tremendous amount of flexibility. What we're seeing in the market is Alaska. Some of the tours are already waitlisted, which is not to say that, you know, there's not a number of suppliers that take it in. Holland America does a terrific program. Holland America tenders right to the dock, but there are beautiful cruise lines. Celebrity, Princess, I could go on about how many do a terrific job in cruising. Obviously, South America, Caribbean, all those sort of warm destinations, and Mediterranean cruise, those are really, really key. And the key that I look at with cruising too is sort of some of that size. What works best for you? Some people are great with 6,000 to 7,000 people. Some want it more intimate. There is something for everybody on a cruising, from small ship to large ship to midship. River cruising is smaller. It's a little bit more intimate. It docks right into the port. It's really very immersive. Kind of the ratio of customer to staff is really quite small. We're seeing, of course, longtime favorites like the Rhine, the Danube, huge popular, but some people are starting to look a little bit beyond that. If they've done the Rhine and the Danube, maybe they're looking at the Mekong, looking how exotic and wonderful, looking at the Douro. So it really does just offer that small immersive experience. And of course, fine dining, you know, amazing excursions. It's a really lovely way to go, especially if you've ocean and you'd maybe like to try something different.
Excellent. Now, Neil, do you have any recommendations for our audience that are considering a cruise?
Yeah, firstly, it's most important to have sufficient emergency medical insurance no matter what type of trip you're planning. I'll say that first and foremost with any conversation around travel. With respect to any type of vacation or trip that involves multiple modes of transportation, multiple destinations, you really will want to consider trip interruption as something that you would need as well. Should the unexpected happen, perhaps something even minor like an illness at any one of the destinations, you know, if you have to stay behind while you receive treatment, that cruise or that tour, they have to carry on without you. And what the trip interruption insurance is going to allow for is to help you with the costs to rejoin that cruise or that tour, maybe at a destination down the road. So you know, it's a pretty big investment that you're making in this, and of finances and also time. And you know, small ailment doesn't mean that you have to miss the rest of the trip. So consider, you know, it might be a flight that you have to take to get caught up. There could be a hotel stay and some transportation and meals near the airport before that flight happens. That's what your travel insurance is going to help you cover, all those costs that are unexpected, and you can rejoin your itinerary down the road. And with CAA travel insurance from Orion, interruption for any reason is something that's included with all of our trip cancellation interruption products at no additional cost.
And it's lovely to see all the questions that are coming into the chat right now. We do have a question for you, Neil. We won't be able to get to all the questions, but we will try our hardest to get to the ones that we can in this webinar. Neil, does CAA offer travel insurance covering motor coach tours and RV tours?
Yes, yeah. I mean, our products cover all types of travel. So it doesn't matter what type of a trip you're taking, your emergency medical insurance, something you're going to want to have, but also your trip cancellation, trip interruption. If you're booking anything through a CAA travel agent, they're going to be able to provide you with a product that'll make sure that the investment you make in your trip is also protected, so that you don't have to risk losing that money.
Okay. Let's move on to group travel. Question for Susan. Susan, we've seen from our own surveys that there is an increased interest in group travel for reasons ranging to multifamily or generations, trips to personal preference, or even a curated experience. Susan, can you talk a bit about the different kinds of group travel that are available today?
Sure. I mean, there are a few kinds. One of the ones to really flag out that we're seeing such gaining interest in is what we refer to as a long stay or an extended group travel. It allows and extends to you the opportunity to kind of go settle in and stretch your legs out into sort of one great destination and then still kind of have the umbrella and support of a group experience. So, we're seeing that the immersiveness that allows you to have flexibility of time, flexibility of value. There could be, a little kitchenette in there that you would get your grocery and be able to sort of work at your own pace. But then when it's time to gather and have a fun group excursion, which you may choose to partake or not, it's all kind of built in. So that kind of group is really, and long stay is really very of interest to people. Malta is a popular one that we sold out Malta for a long stay. Portugal, of course, year after year, a Portugal long stay. Even just Portugal itself is a huge destination. So previously Ireland, Puerto Vallarta. So I think it's a nice way that people are really looking to kind of stretch their legs, spend some time immersively at their own pace, and some flexibility on how they would like to do it when they're there, but all within the comfort and familiarity of a built-in group with you.
And Susan, we hear a lot about solo travel. Can you explain how that works and why it's growing in demand?
I absolutely, solo travel has been really with momentum for a few years now, and it just continues. Solo travel really speaks to just about anyone, regardless. Either they've never traveled before and they would like to sort of venture out, or they've traveled a lot, but perhaps their traveling partner does not have interest or is not there to go with them anymore. They'd like to be able to kind of meet some other people that have a like-minded interest in that destination. Some people prefer to travel, their partner may not want to go to that same destination, but they would still like to go. Some, have had partners who made all the details and they're not going now, and they would like somebody to sort of take care of it. So solo travel is really, really very successful. I referenced, Just You as a terrific tour operator. We also customize our own group travel for solo, but it's independent travel, but then you can still have the camaraderie of others who may have a like-minded passion for that destination. So solo travel is really so popular, and there's so many options. You can really opt in however you would like to on how you want to do your solo.
About solo travel, Susan, we have a question from the audience. Is solo travel any cheaper than regular travel plus the single supplement?
With building groups, they often factor that pricing into the group. So sometimes there is value, and it's sometimes hard to talk about price because it's sort of value is different from person to person, but you can take a look, and they do offer a range. There's a range sometimes of what that group is made up of. A solo group could have hotels that maybe are not right in the prime, and they're maybe a little further out. There's flexibility with how you can customize that. They reference single supplement. That is there. There are cruise lines, all-inclusive resorts do have a single supplement price if you happen to be traveling and you see that price. Some are looking maybe to either waive it, not always, but sometimes that's a promotion that's offered. But I think when you look at the group travel and solo travel, it is built within. So your price is that price what everybody has, and it's built as that, and there's not that single supplement attached to it. Some larger motor coaches do have an allocation of how many single supplements could be on a specific motor coach, but there's lots of flexibility, and it's great questions to ask, and it really helps you gather all the detail to pick your perfect trip.
And with that, we recommend, as always, to have a travel consultant help you plan your trip. Is there a fee to have someone from CAA help you plan your trip?
There's not a fee. If you are a non-member, there is a fee attached to it, but as a member, there is a fee. But even working with your travel agent, there are opportunities as far as membership that could make it a great value to be able to waive the fee. And there's also terrific benefits. You can get shipboard credits. So it's, again, when you work with a state travel agent, ask all those questions and really see what the benefits are.
A lot of them have been to the destinations that you're probably planning to, or the resorts or things. So they're definitely a wealth of knowledge. Over to Neil. Neil, when you're considering a level of protection for a solo or a group trip, is there anything that comes to mind as particularly important about what travelers should think about?
Yeah, I think most of us can appreciate that unexpected events, illnesses, accidents, these can happen no matter what kind of trip you're taking, no matter how long you're traveling for, and no matter who you're traveling with. And that's why your travel insurance offers a variety of different benefits beyond just covering those medical expenses. So let's take solo travel as an example. If something unfortunate happened, you found yourself hospitalized in a foreign country, and you're on a solo trip, you might suddenly realize you're very alone and feeling pretty vulnerable. And your emergency medical insurance can provide benefits to ensure that a bedside companion from home, be that a friend or a family member, can travel to your bedside and be with you while you're recuperating. That's going to provide the coverage for their transportation to your destination, cover them for meals and accommodations. And these are all things that are important to ensure that you're not feeling alone while you're recovering. But the same could be said for a traveling companion. If you happen to be traveling in a group and perhaps one of the group members decides to stay back and be your bedside companion, your travel insurance will extend to them as well to provide the additional coverage for the meals and accommodations and transportation as necessary while they are there beside by your bedside. Again, none of us envisions these types of things happening when we're planning out our perfect trip, but they do happen. And having somebody there, not feeling alone, I think is something we can all appreciate is important, and not something we maybe think about, that additional cost that you would have to incur if something happened.
Yeah, we have a question from the audience for you, Neil. Two questions, actually. Hot topic. Any age limit and restrictions on travel insurance in terms of age?
No, not necessarily, but I would say different carriers would have different restrictions and different limitations. As an example, credit card coverage, there's typically around age 65, you'll find the duration of trip coverage drops dramatically. And certain carriers may approach the medical underwriting at a different age or have different duration restrictions. We do not. So it really is, be aware, talk to a professional if you have any questions about that, talk to a travel agent. These people are licensed and there to help you make an informed purchase decision.
Okay. Another question, Neil, for you is, I see yellow travel advisories for many European countries related to increased risk of terrorism. Can you comment on the implication of these advisories for insurance?
Yes, so that's a really good question, actually. So you're going to find when you look at that travel website from the government, again, travel.gc.ca, there's essentially four levels of travel advisory. So it might be, travel, exercise normal caution as you would traveling anywhere, up to avoid all travel. And we saw this happen during the COVID pandemic, where it was avoid all unnecessary travel. Typically what you find, we talk about as levels 1, 2, 3, 4. So once you get into levels 3 and 4 is where you really should be questioning whether or not this is an important trip or you have to travel, because that's the government is strongly advising not travel due to safety reasons. So why that's important to travel insurance is most travel carriers are going to trigger cancellation benefits for you once you hit a level 3 advisory. And the other thing to consider is if you depart on a trip, knowing that there's a level 3 or a level 4 advisory in place at your destination, if you do happen to run into any instances where you have to interrupt your trip, or if there's if you experience a medical emergency related to the reason of the travel advisory, you might run into some exclusion challenges there. So it's really of those 4 levels, the ones you want to pay attention to if you're hitting a level 3 or a level 4, avoid all non-essential or avoid all travel.
Okay. And we have another question for you, Neil, as well. Last insurance claim, the provider did not want to bill direct. They preferred that we submit expenses. Can Orion ensure the direct billing for medical expenses when in need of medical care and cost of paying direct is beyond the means of the traveler?
Yes. So we work with a third-party provider to ensure that we provide upfront payment whenever possible. Now, to be clear, we are dealing with, global health industry, and depending on where you are in the world, it may be difficult. Those things may or may not be in place, and the medical provider may or may not want to support that. But vast majority of cases, we are able to pay directly, coordinate direct payment. And if you're in a situation where it's out of pocket, we can work with you to ensure that we can support that in the moment.
We have a ton of questions on travel insurance, but we're going to go back to Susan. We're going to talk about a newer type of travel that we're seeing, which is based on experiences. Susan, can you tell us about some unique experiences that are forming the base of interesting visits to new places?
Experiential travel, that's maybe a new word to some, but not to those in travel for the past, 1 year. Creativity is really driving it. And that we talked a little bit about the immersive experience. People want to make pasta in Italy. They want to take a historical tour to Normandy. They want to make pottery in the UK. They want to go to a balloon festival in Albuquerque. All of those kind of experiences, and it's so fascinating. It's terrific to see where people are going and how they want to go there. And for groups, when we look at our group travel, that's really what's being built into some of these amazing tours is the experience. It's one thing to go there. It's another thing of what are you going to do when you're there. And it's extraordinary what was created in groups, but also what members come and ask about too.
And why or with whom are these experiences popular?
I think it's a wide range. I mean, we see, all ages, but really some of those bucket list and experiential, sometimes they go hand in hand and sometimes you can just customize them. We'll have somebody come in who says, this is how I'd like to go and this is where I'd like to go. And can you stitch that together for me? And then we can build the hotels and you build the car, you build the rail, you piece it all together. You kind of select what the hotel looks like, but they really are asking for it to be attached to very specific things like a tuk-tuk tour. They're really wanting it to be something that is very specific. Also, experiential doesn't necessarily have to be in destination per se. There's many who are building a milestone wedding anniversary trip and they go page by page, or they're celebrating a much deserved retirement and they're building that trip. So some of the experience is really built around how they celebrate that or memory making. The customization is really quite endless, and it does allow you again to sort of work within, to some extent, what your budget might be, what your time might be, what your physical activity levels would be. But it's a great way of flagging out exactly what you want and then piecing it together. But experience. And we hear about them all, my favorite, like lighthouses in Atlantic Canada. They want to see all the lighthouses. Or, I saw some of the comments here, which are exactly fantastic. I want to be able to see where the best waterfalls are. It's really what's important to you. If you can dream it, we can build it.
I'll say yes to all of them, Susan. The making pasta in Italy, seeing the lighthouses in Atlantic Canada, balloons, everything, throw it all in. I'm all for it. Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Whether it's these focus trips, a couple of weeks in Florida or a day trip over the border to shop, everyone really should be protected by a good travel insurance policy. Neil, can you tell us some other factors that our audience should think about when planning a trip?
Sure. First, you won't find me in a balloon. I am terrified of heights, but I'm with you, Nadia, to go and see the lighthouses. I love that. So when it comes to travel insurance, I think what I'd really want everybody to consider is that not all travel insurance is equal. Different insurance carriers are going to take different approaches to how they apply limitations and exclusions, particularly around how certain pre-existing conditions are treated. In some cases, when you're going through a medical questionnaire, the medical underwriting process, answers to a medical questionnaire can also change your underlying coverage. So you're going to want to make sure that you pay particularly close attention to how those exclusions may change. Specifically, I would suggest around, is there an exclusion for cardio or lung conditions as examples? Those, depending on, it's not always the case with all carriers, but with some, depending on your answers to a medical questionnaire, you might find yourself with some fairly restrictive exclusions around those pre-existing conditions. Mm-hmm. So it's not a case that a cheaper policy is the best place to go, the best way to go. I think what you want to know is you want to have some comfort and certainty that your policy is going to respond when you need it to in a medical emergency. So don't chase the cheapest policy, and pay particularly close attention to some of those exclusions as you're going through the purchase experience. And I would always, if you have any questions or you're not sure, call your insurance carrier, talk to a travel agent to help you through those decisions. You want to be sure about that. Some other things to consider though too. Make sure, we've talked about buying at the same time you buy your trip to get your travel insurance. That gives you enough time in advance to talk to your doctor if you have to. You can get some support from your family doctor while completing a medical questionnaire. There's also other things you might want to consider depending on the type of trip that you have planned, like some of the things that Susan's spoken about, because there might be some enhancements that you can add on to your travel insurance to cover some of these things, such as if you were to planning to go in a hot air balloon, CAA has adventurous air riders. There's a sport and speed activities rider, which is probably something you'd find me more likely doing instead of the balloon. You can also have a rider that will provide coverage for unstable pre-existing conditions. So do talk to your CAA travel agent or call in to talk to an advisor if you have any questions about that. I think, again, just to really reiterate it, is no matter what type of travel you have planned, you want to have confidence that the product you've purchased to protect you on that trip is going to respond when you need it. So if you have any questions at all or any uncertainty, call your carrier, speak to a travel agent. Finding out in the middle of an emergency away from home that your product's not going to respond is not the time you want to find that out.
Neil, still with you, are there any time limits for insurance coverage?
There can be. There certainly depends how we look at that question, I suppose. There can be time limits to how long you can be out of country. And that ties back to our underlying government health insurance, where each province might have a different time limit, but there's a maximum number of days that you can be out of country in any calendar year. 182 days, very common. And your travel insurance is going to be limited to that as your maximum duration. In certain circumstances, you can apply to have extension on the government health insurance, so you can be out longer, and then you can have longer for your travel insurance. But it's something that you want to definitely pay attention to before you depart.
And do all insurance coverages have a stability clause?
Most do, and generally the stability clause works the same for all carriers, and that's going to come down to the underlying condition is generally covered if you have a pre-existing condition, provided it was stable in a certain period of time before you depart. 6 months, 3 months, it might be a year before departure. And what that stability means is there has not been any change in that condition in that period of time. So no increase in medication, no decrease in medication, no new symptoms, no symptoms disappearing. And this is the type of thing that seems to catch people. It seems like I'm getting better. Well, that's still an indication that the underlying health condition is not stable. That's the type of thing that could trip a pre-existing condition exclusion.
Right. Super important that you really work with your travel agent and travel insurance agent to really understand what those limitations are. You kind of briefly touched upon why cheaper isn't always better. I mean, sure, that sounds like a little bit of a catchphrase, but can you dive into a little bit more about why that is?
Sure. So, I mean, it's going to come down to, the cost of medical care around the world can be expensive. And so as an insurance carrier, forgive me if I don't want to get into too much insurance jargon, but, you're looking to manage your risk and make sure that you've priced the policy effectively. And some carriers are going to limit their exposure to certain risk via exclusions. And, if they're not exposed to certain claims, they're going to be able to charge a cheaper price. And that's kind of it's really the cost of claims that is driving the cost of travel insurance. And we've seen inflation through our lives in everything that we do on a day-to-day basis, be that food, gas, rent, mortgages, and that's true as well with medical costs in other countries. And so that's finding its way into the cost of travel insurance, which is why we're seeing in the industry, some carriers seem to be tightening up their exclusions, tightening up their underwriting guidelines. And that's the type of thing you want to be very cautious of and pay particular attention when you're buying insurance. Is, again, it's not about price. There are other ways to control and manage the cost of your insurance. Deductibles are a great tool that we have at CAA to bring down the cost of your insurance. I think most people would rather, if I had to absorb a $500 or $1,000 claim, is better than having to absorb the other end of the claim. Which is, maybe a $200,000 claim. And so, buying the policy that's not going to respond to that bigger claim is not the place you want to be. You can use deductibles to bring down the cost of insurance if necessary instead.
And just a follow-up question for something that you said earlier, Neil. Neil, is that 182 consecutive days or 182 days within a 12-month period?
That's a great question. It is not consecutive. It is you have a limit. In some provinces, it's 212 days. So check where you're living. It's it's not consecutive, it's in a calendar year. So if you take multiple trips, you're traveling a lot. Once you hit that maximum in a calendar year, your underlying government health insurance will stop and you'll have to reapply. And this happens to Canadians a lot with if you move to another country for work. When you come back, you have to reapply for your government health insurance plan because you've been out of the country for that beyond that duration.
Right. Okay, we're going to take a little pause on travel insurance for right now. We're going to go back to Susan. Lots of great questions. And I want to encourage the audience who is watching that if you do have some questions, either for Susan or Neil, please do send them to us in the chat. We will do our best to try to get to them as best we can. For Susan, how many months ahead of a trip can a traveler approach a CAA travel agent to begin the process of building that trip or that experience? Does it take a few months, a few weeks? What's the recommendation?
The recommendation is somewhat dependent on where you're going, but you can really sometimes come 12 months in advance. We have some who have already booked into, or 2026 when they're looking at where they're going. What tends to be a book later is the flight. We don't always have the schedules. They're not always published by the air providers. So same thing with winter sun destinations. The providers such as Sunwing and WestJet Vacations, they have a schedule that they release that makes it available. But you can, especially if you're looking at something like river cruising, where it's not a large passenger count, you can really start to talk to your agent 6 months, 8 months, 10 months, 12 months in advance. Some of what you need will get layered in later. Your air, or if you're looking at excursions, they'll become more available. Sometimes you really want to secure that space. So realistically, at those bigger trips, or even just those ones that we know that there's not necessarily a lot of inventory, going to Puerto Vallarta is very popular. So I would really encourage that you would probably want to come about 12 months in as a general rule, recognizing that you would have other components that may not be available, but your agent will certainly make note of that and alert you as to when things will be done. Because there's various steps that maybe need to be done. If you're going to a destination that requires a visa, there are things that do have a timeline of cadence. But I don't think it's too early to come 12 or 18 months. Just all of the inventory and the schedules may not be available. You can also come and say, especially if you've got flexibility, and say, hey, I'd like to go to Mexico in 4 weeks. Maybe there's something there. So I don't want to throw anybody off that you also can't come and say, hey, I've got lots of flexibility of time. Sometimes that's there as well.
Everybody loves a good deal, Susan. Is it possible to get a good deal anymore when it comes to travel? Like, can you book really far in advance, or can you get that last minute deal? What's the situation in the marketplace now?
At the situation, there still are some last minute deals, but I preface that with perhaps the deal of today is not the deal that you would have seen, 4, 5, 6, 7 years ago. We do see that across the board, travel is a little bit seeing some expense increases for a variety of reasons. But I think it's just, some do have that last minute. Again, flexibility of time really makes a big difference. So if you're also looking at perhaps how you maybe have a different rate, is avoid traveling at peak season if you can. Maybe don't travel on a long weekend, or if you don't need to go at, if it's spring break, I myself don't want to be traveling during spring break. So avoid those peak times, travel midweek, take a look at some of that. That also helps you kind of take a look at what that expense might be. But I think it gives you some of that flexibility of option. But they are last minute deals. They're just not the deals that maybe we recall from years past.
And do trips typically include flights, or are we talking something separate?
We often, an all-inclusive to Mexico will have the flights in. Often you'll add that flight in. If you're doing a motor coach tour, that can be quoted, part of the tour package, but it is often a segment of that actual whole trip itself. So you would be able to sort of break that down. Some people choose to book the coach with us, and then they book with their Aeroplan points. So you can really customize and segment in as that works best for you.
Okay. And I know that obviously there are pros, I guess, to working with a travel agent in particular. I think finding when we're talking about some of those advisories or things that pop up that we may not be so comfortable, or, new visa requirements for Europe, or the Schlenkel area, or things like that, travel agents generally Maybe you can talk about, are they in the know? Like, what do they know? How do they get their information?
They are in the know, and booking with a travel agent, especially as a CAA member, and there's no fee. It does not. There's no hidden or extra expense to work with a travel agent. We pull from the same itinerary, the same booking system. But a travel agent is really that start to finish. They can really help advise you on exactly. They look at the travel advisory, and there's up to date as possible as well, because it's a really important part of the conversation is to talk about what that looks like. We really do invest in the education of our travel agents. People would really love to talk with a travel agent who's been to Hawaii and can also have that testimonial. We really advocate working with preferred suppliers that are known to us, that we trust and have a great relationship with. I talk about booking excursions and destination. Really always encourage book the excursion with that cruise line. If you want to do it yourself on the cruise line, totally great. But we always encourage book them with that cruise line, with that operator, with your travel agent, and perhaps maybe, something that's been a bit vetted. I mean, peace of mind and safety should really always, kind of be at the forefront when you are looking at those things. But a travel agent can offer all of that expertise. We send our agents on what we call familiarization trips a lot, and they get great feedback too from their own customer. So it's a great way to have a conversation and be able to really invest in that customer service experience from start to finish, from when you're dreaming to when you're finished traveling and you're reminiscing, and then you're already thinking of your next trip.
Okay. I hate to kind of bring up the next question because we were inundated so much about it, but this is really both for Susan and for Neil. Traveling safely in the era of COVID or post-COVID, I suppose now, that big dreaded C word. Susan, maybe what are some things that people should consider, considering, now that things can change so quickly on a dime, what should they consider?
I think they consider, again, always take a look at the country of destination and see what advisories they may have. There are tools online that allow you to put in that country, and it'll pop up exactly what the requirements are, exactly what those specifications might be. In the world of post-COVID, we all remember so many of those restrictions. I mean, I look at it as, I traveled myself last week. People, if they would like to wear a mask, that is what is the most proven one. But as far as COVID restrictions per se, they are not in the travel market. But that does not mean that your country destination does not have guidelines and requirements and restrictions over and above or different from. And I know Neil can really elaborate a lot more on that. But for me, it's really about, it needs to be part of your planning process, is understanding what the requirements are of your country or destination.
Neil, I'm going to throw it over to you. What are your thoughts on that, on traveling safely post-COVID?
Well, I mean, I think just wow, was that ever not a demonstration that the unexpected can happen and happen fast? And we had travelers all around the world that were stuck, needed extensions of coverage. They weren't able to get home, so we had to extend coverage to make sure that their medical coverage continued. I think post-COVID, I think we all have different levels of comfort as to what we might be exposed to, what the relative safety of COVID is. It's still out there. Some carriers now have exclusions, hard exclusions on anything related to COVID, SARS-CoV-2. Others do not. Some, it's a product that you have to purchase in additional coverage for COVID. With, just for the record, CAA's coverage, it's covered. It's not an additional add-on. It's a medical condition. So if you got sick with COVID, you would be covered.
Well, that's helpful to know, right? Because you think that you're buying a travel insurance, medical travel insurance that is all inclusive. And really, when you read the fine print, that may not be the case for everyone. So it's good to know that there are options out there that people just have to ask questions, I guess. Yeah. Best way is to have a list of questions and really kind of dive in there and ask those questions when you're meeting with people. Loving all the questions that are coming in from the audience. Please keep them coming. We do have some time still to answer those questions. Neil, we're going to stay with you. Is it a good idea to purchase extra insurance for travel out of province within Canada, especially for older people in their 70s?
It's a good practice for anybody traveling out of province to have coverage. There's some of those same expenses that I talked about with solo travel to bedside. These things matter. And you can imagine a student maybe being on a ski trip out west, being injured, having to stay in hospital while the rest of the class flies home, probably wants their parent by their side while they're in hospital. There's stories of mountain rescue, mountain evac. These things aren't covered under your provincial healthcare plan. Air ambulance home, if there has to be an air ambulance from one province to another, these things can be very, very expensive. Yes, it's rare. These things don't happen a lot, but that's exactly what your travel insurance is designed to cover. An annual plan is a great option from CAA Insurance. It provides unlimited coverage in Canada. So you don't have to worry about with an annual plan how long you're out of province. As long as you're traveling with a CAA annual plan, you're covered from province to province to province for anything that's beyond what your government health insurance will cover. Yes, it will cover most of those hospital bills, very different than if you're outside of country, but there's all these other expenses that you sort of don't think about that can be very, very expensive to have to cover, and that's what your travel insurance is for.
And you kind of touched upon one of our questions, asking if CAA offers annual plans, and we know that they do. What things that we need to consider when it comes to annual plans?
The thing with the annual plan is it's not. I think we know that you could buy, if anybody doesn't know, it's, we might buy a 15-day plan, you might buy a 30-day plan, you might buy a 60-day plan. It's not the number of days that you're allowed to travel within a year. What that refers to is it's the number of days for any single trip. So if you had a 30-day plan, you can travel as many days as you wanted, as many 30-day trips as you wanted within a calendar year. Again, keep in mind the maximum provincial limit that you might have separate from the policy. But if any one trip goes over that, you're going to want to make sure that you buy top-up coverage for the additional number of days for that one trip. So generally, if you travel, back and forth across the border, you want to have maybe an annual plan that covers you for 4 days or 15 days. That's great to have. But then just for that one trip, you're going to take a year, you can buy the additional coverage. So you still benefit from your annual plan, and just that one trip is what you buy the additional coverage for.
Okay. Say you buy health insurance, Neil, and a few months before your trip, you then experience a change in your health. Do you have to inform your carrier? If so, what is the advantage of buying ahead of time?
So this is another example of where different carriers approach things differently. And so I think what I would say is there's 2 points to this I'd want to make. And it's a very good question, by the way. Some carriers will require you to contact them, and you might have to redo a medical questionnaire. Their expectation might be that you have to pay a different premium in order for you to still be covered when you depart. That's not the case with all carriers. It's not the case with us. When you buy, that you have your product. But separate to that, do keep in mind, so we had the conversation around pre-existing conditions. If there's a change in your health before you depart, that's where you might be fitting into, is this pre-existing condition exclusion going to trigger? Is that something that you're concerned about in any way? And by exclusion, what I mean is there's a reason why a policy will not respond. So depending on when that happens, in advance of your trip departure and what your stability period that we talked about is, you may want to consider calling your travel agent or calling the insurance carrier to make sure that they're okay, that they don't have to charge anything different. But just to be clear, some carriers will expect you to call them before you depart if there's any change in your health.
Right. And I know that you talked about like a stability period. I'm assuming that for different issues, there are different stability periods, right? If it's a cardiac, it may be a longer period. If it's something else.
Yeah. And this is where it's a bit unfortunate, again, that it's different insurer to insurer. And in some cases, it's as simple as, anything that you have in that 3 months before departure, as long as it's stable, is covered. In some cases, it might be any lung condition in the 2 years prior is not covered, but anything else in the 6 months is covered. You can get into the weeds a bit, which is why it's not a bad idea to contact your carrier and make sure that you're really focusing on these pre-existing condition exclusions. Get the advice that you need from a licensed professional like a travel agent to make sure that you're comfortable and confident when you leave. Again, I can't speak for what every carrier does, but it can be different from carrier to carrier. And so you're going to want to pay attention to your insurer and your policy and make sure you read those sections.
Okay, Susan, we haven't heard from you for a while, so let's go back to you. A question from the audience. If you're booking through CAA, do you lose your hotel loyalty points or Air Canada points because you have not booked through those providers specifically?
Not necessarily. We don't book Aeroplan points per se, so that would be something that you would be able to take care of yourself, and you would book those. But if you are a partner of, say, Best Western, and you have those points, they would be keyed in and entered. If you wanted to book a flight with WestJet Vacations, we will put in your loyalty points there. So it's a question of, if you're looking to use your points to book that flight, that would be something that you would take care of on your own. But if you are booking and have loyalty partners, we would be able to certainly put that booking that you make with a CAA agent towards the points program that you might have.
And Susan, how do you determine what vaccinations you need for what countries?
I think, and Neil had talked about it too, is work with your medical provider. We have a travel agent who's already booked her dream safari next year, and so she and her partner are off in mid-spring. She has already has an appointment set with her regional health authority to talk about what are those requirements that she needs to have medically, vaccinations, or things to watch for. So that would be urgent, that we would really want you to make sure that you've talked about that. Going online would be able to provide some of the specifics by country, but if you're going to destinations, always best to check with your medical provider, and or also if you're a regional health authority, and they would be able to provide you some of those meds. But always check with your medical provider would be our best recommendation, because they are there. Going to Africa, there are some requirements that you really want to be mindful, because you want to have a prepared, fantastic time while you're there.
If your doctor isn't aware of what perhaps the requirements are to one specific country in Africa, you had said regional healthcare might help as well. But I'm wondering, would travel agents have, like, oh, by the way, you should know
Yes.
that this particular fever is happening here, so you would need to contact your medical professional on that?
For sure. Part of, their extensive knowledge is that they're really going to bring forward the things that you need to be aware of. At the end of the day, you look to them to be able to provide all of that information. So they would really cover off things that you need to know. Right along talking about visas, we would talk about, these are the things that you'd need to be mindful of your country of destination, and ensure that you have it taken. Some of them will also even tell you sort of the timeline of when to do that. They'll give you some pointers as to where you should go for that. So absolutely, they can assist you with information.
Okay. And Susan, how can people travel more and sustainably and consider, the environment and do things a little bit more greener, I suppose, if that's an area where it concerns them? I
I think
suppose
a lot of the
the
cruise companies and the tour operators, I mean, there's certainly work to go, but they are certainly making some inroads and really trying to have that more mindful approach to it. Companies such as Trafalgar, they're part of a tour company that's larger. They do a lot of, in destination work with local communities that really give back and support within. Even just the documents now, they're almost all e-documents. There's not as much level of paper as there used to be. Internally, travel agents have less paper. You'll see destinations like Costa Rica, very popular ecotourism, really mindful of what the destination is and being very respectful and courteous of it. There's a lot of regulation around, certain destinations, or excursions that involve on the ocean. So is it absolute hard work being done on it? And then we're seeing some progress for sure. And you can pick destinations that have a really specific ecotourism approach, and really that sustainability. And, I think I had seen a comment too about traveling without, an e-card, or if they're going to Europe and roaming, be mindful that a lot of your documentation is paperless. So what is your plan, and how can we do that? And a travel agent can also assist you with some of that, about this is what they would recommend if you're using a cell phone in Europe, and how to access your documents and all of those type of things.
I'm still a little bit old school, Susan. I love to have a piece of paper in my hand, and I have to really kind of resist that, desire to want to physically have all my documents at my fingertips.
Yeah, your travel agent can still print several of them for you should you wish. Not all, but we understand too. I myself like a good notebook of paper with me sometimes too.
It's a little bit more reassuring. But anyways, we won't get into my isms or anything like that. Susan, another question for you. What is the best day to start travel? Is it true that you can start travel on a Tuesday and get maybe perhaps cheaper prices?
Sometimes, yeah, depending on where you're going. If you can go off season and heck midweek, kind of avoid a long weekend if you can. But yeah, that Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, that can be a sweeter spot. You'll see. I mean, we're right in summer, and those seat sales are really starting to be advertised. But yeah, if you have some flexibility, time of day, also take a look at the time of day. is a recommendation that may give you some flexibility in price. And also there's different classes of fares. Are you going to check a bag, not check a bag? Is it included in your fare? Lots of things to look at as to how you can perhaps avoid some fees or accept some fees that you are now aware of. It's a lot of information there.
I have noticed the time of day travel stuff when I've gone out and booked my own flight for work or something like that. Notice those peak times of travel to get to, work or after work, 6 o'clock, those flights tend to be more expensive. So that's really interesting. Thank you for that. We've only got really time for maybe perhaps one or more two questions. Question for Neil. Can you discuss a little bit about credit card insurance? I think we're under the impression that we've got credit card insurance, we're covered, but there are some things that may be the case, but there's some things that you need to consider, right?
Yeah, credit card coverage, like anything else, I think you need to pay attention to the fine print, the details, how many days of coverage that you have per trip. It definitely will reduce once you turn 65. That's about the age that all carrier duration limits will start to cut back. Other things to consider about the card is, do you have the maximum sum insured? Is it sufficient? Do you have $1 million or do you have $2 million? $1 million Canadian is not $1 million US, and you're going to want to make sure that you have sufficient coverage. So you might need to buy top up if you're relying on your credit card. And also for your family. In some cases, the credit card will provide coverage for your dependents, whether they're traveling with you or not. In some cases, they require the primary card holder to be traveling with you. So there's a lot of little nuanced differences from carrier to carrier. And I think you want to make sure that you pay attention to what it is that you're relying on before you make the decision to travel with it.
And a little tip that I didn't know until recently is that if you've got travel credit card insurance, it really only covers whatever you book with your credit card, right? So it's not like it extends to everything that you perhaps need, right?
Yeah, that's very often true, especially with the cancellation and interruption coverage, which can be very limited on the reasons why those coverages would pay out, but they are limited to when you book travel on your card, yes.
Okay. Wow, some really, really great information. We're going to say goodbye shortly, but I just kind of want to know, Susan, Neil, what are your next trips planned for you?
Well, my next
Susan?
trip is behind me, glorious Vancouver Island. I'll be there in about 7 days.
Excellent. Very good. Neil?
For me, New Orleans, going down to see a football game in the fall.
Very good. And in a few weeks, I'll be traveling to the Portuguese islands of the Azores. So very excited about that. We covered a lot of really good practical information in today's webinar, but we realized that we weren't perhaps able to get to everyone's questions. If you do have some questions, please call the number. And I'm wondering if we could put the number up on the screen. It is 1-833-673-3030. Or alternatively, you can visit carp.ca/CAA. If we don't have that number on the screen, we can just send you to the CARP CAA website. Again, that is carp.ca/CAA. I just want to say thank you to everyone. And on behalf of Susan, Neil, our CARP partner, and myself, we'd like to thank you for watching. Stay safe, and I hope most of all you have fun. Take care, everyone.